This is a 1967 Husky 250. This was a duplicate bike to the first bike that I won a gold medal on in Poland in 1967. Back in 1966, I was the service manager and ran the repair shop for K&N motorcycles, and I was racing GREEVES motorcycles. One day, a guy with a little French beret stuck his head in the window in the door and said, "Who's Malcolm Smith?" And I said, "I am. Why do you want to know?" And he said, "Well, I heard you're the fastest racer in California. I'd like to hire you to race my HUSQVARNA motorcycle I'm going to import into the U.S." And I said, "Oh, I love my old GREEVES. They're made really strong." And I showed him my GREEVES. It had a big aluminum frame, and it was real bulky looking, and I loved it. At least I thought I did. And he said, "Well, if you would race a HUSQVARNA for me, I would send you to the 6 days in Sweden." It was one of my dreams to go to the 6 days. It's like the Olympics of motorcycling. And my financial ability at that time was impossible to have enough money to ever go. So he got my attention. I said, "Well, let's go test this motorcycle. If it's not any good, I don't want to race it." And we drove to Rattlesnake Mountain, about 3 miles from the store where we had a track. Anyway, I unloaded the bike. It started the first kick, and I went one lap around the course, and I pulled in where he was standing. I said, "Edison, you've hired yourself a rider." The bike was so much better than the GREEVES I was riding. After the first 2 desert races, I realized how good this motorcycle was, and I realized the potential here. I could talk Edison Dye into letting me sell them. So he agreed to let me sell them. I bought a brand new little Dodge van, made a bunch of cabinets inside it, and would take parts to the races. And I'd sell parts in the morning to the racers, and then I'd race the race and then sell parts and bikes to the racers after the race. That was the start of Malcolm Smith Motorsports. My first gold medal was in Poland. I roomed with Bud Ekins. He was a famous motorcycle racer before my time, and he was my hero, and it was his last 6 days in Poland. Since I'd won a gold medal on this bike, the factory shipped it to me, and I rode it for a couple of years and then sold it to a friend of mine, and about 8 years later got it back from him and restored it. This is a 56 Matchless, and they were made in England, and they're 500cc. I saw this Matchless chained up the telephone pole. It looked like a real motorcycle to me. I went into the farmhouse and asked how much they wanted for it. They said $175. So I sold my motor scooter and bought it, I think, the next day because I was afraid somebody else would buy it. Anytime I wasn't in school, I was riding my motorcycle. I grew up in San Bernardino, California, and my old Matchless was kind of worn out. And to keep it running, I had to go to motorcycle dealerships and go through their trash cans and get old parts. At the same time, I started buying old motorcycles and fixing them up and selling them. My first 6 days was in Sweden. It was a wide awakening for me because I was a desert racer and rode on dry ground. Sweden was all mossy and muddy and root-covered, moss-covered rocks, and I crashed so many times, and I got a silver medal but didn't get a gold medal. And the next year I rode in Poland, and I roomed with Bud Ekins, and he was my hero. We were talking one night, and he said, "You know, they're going to have a race in about a month. They're going to start in Tijuana, and they're going to go to La Paz, Baja, 1,000-mile race. So I got back to California, called Edison Dye, the importer of Husky, and I said, you know, they're going to have a big race. We could get a lot of publicity if we won that race. I said, would you give me a bike? So he gave me a 360 Husky, 1967. I think I rode about 10 Baja 1000s and 500s on a Husky. Winning the Baja races because showed the reliability of the motorcycle plus the speed. It was real good publicity for HUSQVARNA to win. If you notice, my face is pushed in from the wind. I'm going probably about 100 miles an hour there. The pants are pushed up against the boots, old lace-up lineman's boots in those days. I used those glass lens goggles. Everybody laughed at them. And everybody said, why do you use those weird-looking, like car racing goggles? I never told them. If you use the plastic lens, and when they got dust on them, you wipe the plastic, pretty soon it gets all scratched. And then the inside of the goggle, the plastic would get magnetic and it would get dust on the inside. So that was hard. You had to stop and clean it off. And so with the glass, it didn't create the magnetic. And you could wipe it off forever and it didn't scratch them. The backpack was a hiking backpack with leather straps. We carried gallon jugs of gas in there because we didn't have enough mileage range. You can see the big headlight, and the fender flap in the front, the air pressure's pushing it down. This is the bike I rode in the 6-day trials in Massachusetts. It was the first time the 6 days was held in the United States. The 6 days is like the Olympics of motorcycling. This was the 1973 6 days. It's the first time the American team had ever won the Silver Voss. And I was part of that team. Most of the time at the 6 days, the factory would bring from Sweden the motorcycles to Poland or Germany that I would ride. But this year, in '73, I got to build my own bike, ship it back to Massachusetts, and this is that motorcycle. And I put a much lighter gas tank. It's an aluminum gas tank. It takes a lot of weight off the top end of the bike. It has solid aluminum handlebars where they flex, so when you're hitting bumps, it moves a little, takes some of the shock up out of your arms. Also, I made these rock guards on the bottom to protect the engine, because of the big rocks you would break the engine cases. And I handmade a set for this bike, and then I had a big demand. People wanted to buy them, so I started producing them. The seat is suede instead of naugahyde. The suede, when it gets wet, you stick. You don't slide all over the seat. Another product I made to sell was the Malcolm Smith tool bags. These are heavy leather tool bags. Just common sense fasteners. You put all your tools in there. Instead of them on a backpack, you had the weight down lower, so you didn't have that weight on top of your back. The motorcycle, once you start the event, no one can touch the motorcycle except the rider. And you can only work on it with the tools you carry with you. So you have to have a real reliable motorcycle to be able to fix it very quickly. You had to have working headlights. They could stop you in the middle of the event at a checkpoint and check your headlights. If your headlight didn't work, you had to fix it right then. You couldn't go on. And also, the engines were sealed. They drilled holes in the cylinder head and the cylinder and the engine and the frame, and they put these cables with lead seals on it with a stamp that you couldn't counterfeit very easy. So you couldn't take the engine apart, you couldn't replace a lot of parts. There were about 40 parts on the bike that were marked with your paint and your number. And if you came into a checkpoint and your number was 34 or 168, and that shock said 175, you've borrowed the shock from somebody else, so you get penalized. I was the first HUSQVARNA dealer in the USA. Winning the Silver Voss, I got a lot of publicity, and being a HUSQVARNA dealer, everybody wanted to come in and buy a Husky from me in this area. It was a big part of our success. This project, it's a 1954 MOTO GUZZI FALCONE from Italy, and it's probably the rarest motorcycle I have. I've been collecting parts to restore it from Italy for about 10 years now, and I have all the parts, so I'm going to get busy on it and get it done. Somebody had put Triumph fenders on it, and I have the original fenders now. I'm not going to repaint it or anything. I'm just going to clean it up well and get it running. And it's a 500cc horizontal single cylinder, and it has a, they call them bologna slicer. When the engine ran, the flywheel spun at engine speed right next to your leg, and the foot peg, you use the heel to work the rear brake, not the toe. And they were monoshock. The spring for the suspension is under the engine. Anyway, the museum is free at the store, and we're also looking for donations. So if you have a kind of a rare motorcycle or a HUSQVARNA, if you donate it to the museum, we can give you a tax receipt of the value of it, and you can write it off on your taxes. Feel free to contact myself or Ashley Smith or Alexander Smith at the motorcycle store. This 125 Lambretta motor scooter from Italy is a 1953 model, and I bought it brand new when I was 13 years old from John Burr Cycles in San Bernardino. He taught me how to ride it in the alley behind his dealership. He sat on the back seat and I sat on the front, and he taught me how to shift it. The shifter's there, worked the clutch and the brake. We rode up and down the alleyway a couple times, him demonstrating, and he said, "Do you think you can do it?" And I said, "Sure." I got in, rode up and down the driveway, and fell in love with it right away. And we loaded it up in my mother's old Lincoln, took it home, and immediately unloaded it and started riding in the foothills in the San Bernardino Mountains. And then my best friend, John Moreland, his parents bought him one too. Every day after school we'd ride in the foothills. We'd paint the scooters different colors. We took off mufflers so they were loud and obnoxious. We thought they were faster. We were always stripping weight off, drilling holes and things to make them lighter. Made knobby tires with football cleats we got from the football coach in school. But it was always race, who could be the fastest. I had the bike for about 2 years, and then I was riding to high school, saw a matchless single, chained up to a telephone pole, $175. And this was a real motorcycle. And I sold the scooter and bought the matchless. When I turned 18 years old, I got my pro license. I could ride professional racing then and get paid prize money. So I rode a TT race at De Anza Fairgrounds on a Sunday, got 3rd place. I thought, boy, I'm on my way to a motorcycle racing career. The next day I hit my best friend head on. This was the day after I received my pro license, and boy, I thought I was on my way to a career of motorcycle racing. My two friends and I were out cow trailing, and I went back. He didn't come out of the canyon, and I went back to look for him, and I met him head on and around a blind corner. He hit right here on the motorcycle, bent my matchless about that much in half, and my leg was in the middle of it, and it broke my left leg lower part about 7 places and the upper part 3. And they took me to Kaiser Hospital in Fontana. Anyway, my left lower leg was swelling up. They had to give me 1 liter of blood every day. And my leg was bigger around than my chest. It was so swollen. And they told my mother they'd have to amputate my leg below the knee. My mother said, no, I want to research this a little bit. And she found a doctor who had just graduated from UCLA he had experience taking bones out of your hip, putting down places where you'd lost chunks of bone, and screws and metal plates. And I think it was 3 or 4 operations they had to do, and saved my leg. In about 1962, K&N Motorcycles, Norm McDonald, asked me to come to work for him as a service manager in Riverside. And I was racing GREEVES motorcycles from England, but my practice bike, I had this motorcycle. I bought brand new from them, and it was a BSA 440 Victor. It was street legal, but it was like a race bike. And rode it all over the hills practicing, so I didn't wear out my race bike. And then I sold it to a friend of mine in about 1965, and he moved to Bonners Ferry, Idaho, and I didn't hear a word from him. And about 3 years ago, he called and said, I still have that BSA, do you want it? I'll give it to you. I said, yeah, hang on to it. I'll get up there and get somebody to come and get it. And that's up by the Canadian border. And so I got this bike back after 43 years. But I built special foot pegs for it back in those days. I made the seat, leather-covered seat. Making the seat, I found out that there was a market for better products for motorcycles. Like this has an aluminum base and leather cover, and I would put Ceriani forks from Italy on the bikes. The HUSQVARNA forks were very stiff in the rocks, so I'd put the Ceriani forks, and the Ceriani forks are on this BSA, but I realized there was a market for aftermarket products. Started importing and distributing to dealers motorcycle racing parts and clothing. I don't know how we did this. Boy, I wouldn't want to be in a driver's change in a hurry. I raced a motorcycle in the 1967 Baja 1000, and right after the race I was doing a photo shoot with the Los Angeles Times, and I broke my left leg. I couldn't race the second Baja 1000 on a motorcycle because my leg was still healing, and I built a 2-seater buggy that I drove in the race. It kind of hooked me on the buggies. I built a single-seater buggy and raced the 1000 the whole way myself, 27 hours. And realized it was too long a drive for one person. So I just sold a motorcycle to a friend of mine that was a dental student at Loma Linda University. And Bud Feldkamp was his name. He now owns Glen Helen Raceway. And so I called him and I said, we ought to race together. We built this car in about 1973. It's a single-seater, only one person drives in it. You climb in from the front and flip this flip up, stand up here and slide in. And Bud is a lot larger than I am. So I had to sit on a 4-inch pad in the car to get up where I could see out to drive it. Anyway, this car we won the 4-time overall Baja Championship with, and we won the High Desert and the Baja Racing Championship 2 years in a row. One reason we had a lot of success with this car, we had a mechanic, Scott McKenzie, that maintained it and did the pit stops for us and everything. We didn't have the best handling or the fastest car, we had the most durable car. The nets in it are so when you do an end over end, your hand doesn't come off the steering wheel and out the side of the car. Cut your arm off when the car lands. These are centerline spun aluminum wheels. They're 2 aluminum pieces riveted together. Very lightweight. There's 3 shock absorbers on the back with cooling fins. This has a fuel cell in it. It's actually a bladder inside an aluminum case. And you use race gas. A lot of times the races are maybe 300 or 400 miles long and the car will only go 125 miles. So we have quick fills. So we have a tank on both sides with these big 10-gallon cans. When you come into the pit, they flip the gas up. Gas goes all over everywhere. You hope nothing ignites, especially you. This bumper is a very important part of an off-road race car because when you have to pass somebody, you honk the horn. If they don't move over, you honk it a couple times, and then you pull up and tap them in the back. Just a slight tap so they feel somebody's there. And then if they don't move then, you tap and connect with them, hold the throttle wide open, push them off a corner or something to get by. When we would race this car, if there was any night racing involved, like in Baja or Baja 1000, we had lots of headlights on it. We would have maybe 4 up front, the 2 back here, so we could light up the sky. You notice this car is a single-seater. The driver sits right in the middle of the car, so he knows the distance the wheels are out from him on both sides are equal. When remote control cars came out, they made a duplicate of our race buggy, and we painted it up to look exactly like ours with Bud Feldkamp, Malcolm Smith name on it. No, maybe they drained it. Okay, I'm going to try to get out. Okay. Yep. When I went to work for K&N Motorcycles, they were a BSA dealer, so I had to get rid of my Matchless and start riding a BSA Gold Star. One of the owners of K&N Motorcycles, Norm McDonald, bought a 1964 Greeves motorcycle. It was a 250 two-stroke. It was much lighter and it had less top speed as the Gold Star did. It was manufactured by a company in England that made wheelchairs. The owner of the wheelchair factory was paralyzed, so he made these electric wheelchairs. And then he got enthused about motorcycle racing, so he started producing racing motorcycles. And that was the Greeves motorcycle. This is a later model one than I raced. I had Norm's Greeves out working on it, and I had a course in the San Bernardino Mountains where I would kind of practice on my Gold Star. And I timed myself doing the course. It felt like I was going fast. And then I rode the Greeves, which was a lot lighter and a lot more agile, but less power and less top speed. And I timed myself and I was faster on the Greeves. So I talked to the importer of the Greeves. He helped me, gave me a discount, and if I would win the race on the weekend, he would pay my entry fee. That was the sponsorship in those days. I found it had been stored for 30 years. To support my habit of wanting to race motorcycles, you had to pay entry fees and gas to get to the races. And I would buy old motorcycles, put them back together or fix them up and sell them. Now I like these old motorcycles. They bring back a lot of memories of working on them. This old Triumph, I'm putting it back together, put new plugs in it, cleaning the carburetor, and it was kind of the last hurrah of the English motorcycle business. They made a light aluminum tanks to make the bike lighter because the BSAs and Triumphs were too heavy compared to the other bikes. These days, what I'm doing with a lot of my time is restoring old motorcycles. I loved mechanical things all my life. I loved the puzzle of trying to make one run. Challenge to try to make them better, faster, more reliable, lighter. I still love the challenge to this day.